It was a grim and silent evening inside the office room. The atmosphere was hushed, and no one remained there except for two individuals. Dahoon was engaged in a cardio training session with team manager Lee So-hee. She appeared confused and uneasy, expressing concern that they shouldn't be doing such a thing in the office. However, the training was already underway, and the irony of the situation was heavy. He had ended up training with not just a colleague but the team manager, who, as fate would have it, turned out to be the mother of the very girl who had once destroyed his life. The moment had finally arrived. It was time for revenge. Rewinding to a month prior, Dahoon had been seated at his desk in the office, immersed in work, when a sudden message notification popped up. It was from team leader Lee So-hee. He had wondered why she would be messaging him and what reason she might have to summon him. As of the previous day, Suk Dahoon had completed 1 full year working at the company. He had thought to himself how inconvenient it was that the team leader's office was so far away. Reflecting on his past, he remembered how he had dropped out of high school due to severe social anxiety. Yet, he had overcome it and managed to pass the GED exam. Eventually, he had graduated from a nationally recognized university, even though he had joined later than most of his peers. Despite the delay, he had secured employment, which in itself felt like a personal triumph. On his way to the team leader's office, it struck him just how unbelievable it was that an entire year had already passed since he had started working there. Now, having reached her office, he stood before the door, thinking that if anyone were to ask him whether anything extraordinary had happened in his life, despite living a fast-paced and routine schedule, he would most certainly say it involved the team leader. After knocking, he heard her voice from inside, inviting him to come in. Entering the office, he found her seated comfortably and appearing to be in a particularly pleasant mood. Politely, he asked her if she had called for him. Lee So-hee, the team leader, was known as an extraordinary individual who had achieved success at a young age. She was widely respected across the company for her admirable qualities and impressive skills. She excelled in nearly every aspect of her work. Observing Dahoon lost in thought, she interrupted him with a teasing remark, questioning why he was daydreaming. Then, noticing something, she commented on the scent of alcohol lingering around him and asked if he had been drinking with his colleagues the previous night. Embarrassed, he admitted that she was correct. Laughing, she acknowledged her accurate guess. Dahoon, however, couldn't help but notice how her actions often contradicted her words. Despite her authoritative tone, her beautiful and mature demeanor gave off a different impression. She went on to mention that she had called him in partly to congratulate him on completing 1 year at the company, just as he had celebrated with his team. She explained that she wanted to collaborate with him on a new project and that manager Daesum had recommended him for it. She said she looked forward to working with him. Casually, she placed a small bottle of alcohol in his pocket and told him to drink it to sober up, saying she would be waiting in meeting room B. Looking down at the bottle, he nodded respectfully and assured her he would do his best. The day dragged on, filled with exhausting tasks. Later that night, she asked him how he had found their first meeting together. He replied that he had mostly just sat quietly and listened to the others. She told him that it was understandable, considering it had been his first time in such a meeting. Then she informed him that starting the next day, they wouldn't be able to avoid night shifts anymore. Surprised, he asked for confirmation, and silently, he thought about how the two of them working night shifts together didn't sound so bad. In fact, every man in the company, himself included, harbored a secret wish to work nights with the alluring team leader. But for now, it remained just a dream. The elevator arrived, and both of them stepped inside. As the doors opened again, she asked if he was heading straight home. He confirmed he was, then inquired whether she was heading to the station. Internally, he reflected on how no one had ever dared flirt with the team leader. After all, she was a company executive, and a married woman at that. She explained that she wasn't going home just yet because her daughter had come to pick her up, wishing him a safe journey home. He responded with similar words, thanking her and saying goodbye. As he walked away, he found himself deep in thought. Despite her being a married woman, he couldn't help but feel drawn to her. She was incredibly attractive, but the risks were far too great. To him, she resembled a forbidden fruit hanging precariously from the edge of a cliff. And yet, despite knowing better, he had wanted to have dinner with her. While lost in those thoughts, a young woman passed by him. He glanced at her, wondering if she was a visitor. She stood there looking awkward, and he found himself wondering if she might be the team leader's daughter. Moving closer, he addressed her gently, telling her she seemed lost. But as she turned around to face him, his entire body stiffened in shock. It was Han Somi. He couldn't believe it. Staring at her in disbelief, A rush of terrible memories flooded back. She was the very same bully from his high school days, the one who had harassed him relentlessly. She had been the reason he had dropped out of school and had developed the social anxiety that still plagued him. He recalled a particularly humiliating incident in which she had poured milk on the floor and ordered him to lick it. Snapping back to the present, rage welled up inside him. Just then, Lee So-hee walked over to the young woman and asked affectionately whether she had been waiting long. The girl, her daughter, responded with mild irritation, questioning why her mother had taken so long. She hugged her tightly. Lee So-hee explained that she had thought her daughter was waiting in the parking lot and asked if she hadn't mentioned having plans that day. Han So-mi replied that she had canceled those plans to have dinner with her mother, insisting that her mother was more important. Hidden behind a nearby wall, Da-hoon observed the interaction with wide eyes, stunned beyond words. The truth crashed down on him in waves. Han So-mi, the person who had ruined his youth, was Lee So-hee's daughter. Da-hoon stood frozen in place, his thoughts a chaotic whirlwind. He kept telling himself that he had moved on, that he had buried the pain of the past deep within and had let go of everything related to her. But now, faced with her unexpected return, everything resurfaced. Why, of all times, did she have to appear in front of him again? The name he had worked so hard to forget came rushing back. Han So-mi. His heart trembled in fury. The overwhelming emotions boiled into a single word that echoed inside his head. Revenge. Yes, revenge was what he needed. That was the only way to ease the storm inside him. He clenched his fists, shaking slightly, and forced himself to think clearly. If she had caused him to lose something precious, he would repay the favor in kind. She needed to lose something, no, someone equally valuable. That was the only way to balance the scales. His gaze turned cold as he thought that the person most important to her must be her mother. The following evening, team leader Lee So-hee was working late during her night shift in the office. She sighed quietly to herself, trying to muster some energy. She muttered that she couldn't afford to feel tired already, especially not when the shift had just started. She reminisced briefly about her younger days, back when she didn't even need supplements to keep going. Youth truly was a gift, she mused. A small smile tugged at her lips as she wondered how Da-hoon was doing at that moment. Just then, Da-hoon entered her office, carrying a calm and polite expression. He approached her and mentioned that he was planning to make some coffee, and asked if she would like a cup as well. Gratefully, she agreed and told him that sounded wonderful. He made his way into the office kitchen and began preparing the coffee, casually asking her preference, hot or cold, or whether she would like some ice added. She responded that she'd like it iced. As he busied himself with preparing the drinks, his mind was far from peaceful. Behind his calm expression, there was a different resolve brewing. Handing her the cup, he asked with a teasing smile whether she wasn't staring at him a little too much. Then, in a quiet and reflective inner voice, he acknowledged what he was about to do. He had already decided to throw himself off the metaphorical cliff, to dive headfirst into the madness of his plan. And although he knew it was reckless, even foolish, he had finally found a reason to go through with it. Lee So-hee responded playfully, saying that she had simply been wondering about something. She pointed out that he seemed to be working out quite a lot lately. Perhaps it was because he was still young, but his muscles looked particularly well-toned. Then, tilting her head with mild curiosity, she asked aloud whether they were hard. Her words sent a chill of strange excitement down his spine. This, he thought, was his reason, the justification for everything. He looked at her and offered with a soft grin that if she wanted, she could touch them. After all, they were alone in the office and he didn't mind. But beneath his polite demeanor and flirtatious tone, his mind remained sharp and calculating. This was all part of the plan. He wasn't just flirting for the sake of attraction. He was preparing a stage. He was going to gaslight Han So-mi's mother, to pull her into an emotional snare. This would be his way of making Han So-mi pay for what she had done to him. He told himself that he would make sure to deliver the best present So-mi had ever received, and it would come in the form of her mother's heartbreak. Lee So-hee had looked at him with a hint of confusion when he had made that bold comment about letting her touch his muscles. She asked what he meant by that and told him to stop messing around. Smiling awkwardly, she excused herself and then slowly reached out. Her fingers brushed his arm, and she gasped softly. His muscle felt solid beneath her touch, his veins visible beneath the skin, and his body was unusually warm. For a moment, she let her hand linger. In the back of her mind, she wondered how long it had been since she last touched a man's body, even in such a small way. But the thought startled her and realization struck hard. Dahoon, still holding his calm demeanor, asked her with a playful grin if it felt good. She replied with a half-teasing remark, suggesting he must be popular with women. He chuckled and mentioned that he had spent a lot of time working out during a long period at home, decided it was best to redirect the moment. He suggested they get back to work. But just as they were about to move, her hand jerked and she accidentally spilled coffee onto his shirt. He looked down, noting the spreading stain and how soaked the fabric had become. She gasped in surprise and quickly offered him her handkerchief, apologizing sincerely and asking if he was okay. Without hesitation, she stepped forward and began wiping his shirt, gently blotting the fabric. She assured him she would take care of it. Dahoon remained silent as he watched her. Behind his composed face, his mind was sharp and calculating. He wasn't just thinking about the coffee. He was watching her reaction, her proximity, the gentle way she tried to clean up after the accident. To him, this was only a piece of the larger puzzle. In his heart, he had already made up his mind. She would become the reason he would walk straight off the cliff, into revenge, into chaos, into something irreversible. Elsewhere in the city, Hansomi was behind the counter at the cafe, working as the manager. She passed coffee to a pair of male customers, smiling brightly. The young men, clearly smitten, whispered to one another about how beautiful she looked. Her cheerful smile and effortless charm had long been the talk of regulars. As she handed over the drinks, she encouraged them to enjoy. The two boys continued whispering, saying she had always been popular, especially when she smiled like that. But just then, Dahoon stepped forward, appearing out of nowhere. His expression was serious, and without hesitation, he told her that she owed him an apology. She looked up, taken aback, and asked why she should be the one to apologize. According to her, it had been his fault for being such an easy target back then. Her tone was casual, dismissive, as if she didn't even remember what she had done. Dahoon stood in place, his breath caught in his chest, boiling inside. How could she act as if nothing had happened? As if the years of torment she had caused didn't matter? Inwardly, his anger screamed. She was living a normal life, untouched, unbothered, like she hadn't pushed him to the edge. He thought bitterly about the countless nights he'd spent in darkness, fighting back the urge to end it all. The emotional wounds still hadn't healed. For years, he had tried to forget her, and now here she was again, smiling in public, surrounded by admiration, while he carried scars from her cruelty. It wasn't fair, and in his heart he blamed her entirely. Later that evening, back in the office, the night shift had begun. It was the final day of the project. Dahoon sat in silence, staring at the dim lighting, his thoughts drifting to darker intentions. He told himself that this was the night he would act. After all the waiting, after the preparation, this was his chance. The project was nearly over, and soon there would be no further excuse to see her every day. He glanced at Lee So-hee across the room and thought about how they had worked closely over the past week. In a sudden motion, he flipped the switch on the wall and turned off the lights. The office went dark. Casually, he announced that the lights must have gone out. But his intentions were far from innocent. He looked over at the cupboard and pointed, telling her that the printouts might be over there. Inside, he was already weighing the risk. Was he truly willing to gamble everything for a chance at revenge? He moved closer to her, thinking back over the week they'd spent together. One thing had become obvious to him. The team leader, for all her strength and poise, was unexpectedly vulnerable to physical closeness from men. He began closing the distance between them. So he stepped back slightly, clearly uncomfortable, and told him he was standing too close. But Dahoon ignored the warning. With firm resolve, he addressed her, saying that before he could train her properly, he first had to make her his. She froze, completely stunned, asking what he meant. His tone didn't waver as he replied that he couldn't go back now. Confused and alarmed, she asked him again what he was doing. He told her that he had waited a long time for this moment. He insisted that she had waited too, that every time they had touched while working, she had secretly expected more. She quickly denied it, telling him he was mistaken. Still, he reached out and gently touched her hand. When she flinched, he used that reaction to prove his point. He noted that even a slight touch could make her react so visibly. She scolded him, telling him to stop joking around. But he continued. He told her that he would help her understand, not just the satisfaction of being a career woman, but the joys of being someone who embraced emotional and physical connection. She was growing visibly upset now. Her voice sharpened as she told him it wasn't right to conduct any kind of workout session in the office, especially not like that. Her eyes narrowed in disapproval, and she made it clear that the boundaries he was trying to cross were unacceptable. He had also mentioned that he needed to train her in wrestling so that she could experience what he referred to as the real pleasure of being a woman. After making that remark, he burst into laughter, clearly amused by his own comment. He then went on to say that she was right about something she had said earlier, though he didn't specify what. He added that he had noticed her constantly looking away during their interactions, implying that she had been trying to hide something. He told her that he had found it strange how she had been paying such special attention to him, as if something more were going on beneath the surface. She was visibly confused and asked him what on earth he was talking about. Her tone suggested that she wasn't just surprised, but genuinely disturbed by his words. In response, he claimed that he understood the situation well and that it was unfortunate, for him at least. Given her position as team leader, her age, and her strikingly attractive body, he confessed that he couldn't help feeling excited every time they worked out together. There was something about her that stirred up feelings he said he couldn't control. Then, as if acting on impulse, he gently touched her. Her body stiffened as she processed the sensation. Internally, she found herself feeling unusually strange. She told herself that she should absolutely detest this moment. After all, it was Dahoon who was touching her. But instead of revulsion, her body was reacting in a way she couldn't explain. She finally gathered her composure and told him firmly to stop, emphasizing that what he was doing was incredibly risky and inappropriate. Despite her discomfort, she turned and walked a few steps away from him, trying to regain control of the situation. She said aloud that there was no way he could have feelings for her. No way at all. She needed to leave immediately, declaring that she would go first. She told him he should clean up and leave afterward. She made her way toward the door, but before she could reach it, he asked her if she was really going to leave like that. He then walked over and shut the door, telling her bluntly that he hadn't said she could leave yet. They still had unfinished office work to complete. Inside, his thoughts were jumbled, his head a complete mess. He didn't seem to know exactly what he was doing, yet he pressed on. She turned back toward him and told him to stop joking around with her. But he insisted that he was serious. He said he had known it all along, that he had been holding back his feelings for a long time, trying not to let them show. She looked at him again and asked, more insistently this time, what he was talking about. His response was unsettling. He said that he had felt this way before, and that even though she was a bit clumsy as a team leader, it was okay to be honest about one's feelings. Otherwise, it would make no sense for someone with such a stunning body to act as though she were completely unaware of the effect she had on others. He added that her defenseless demeanor only intensified that impression. She told him it had to stop, that he had taken it too far. But he ignored the warning. He said that in many ways, it was her fault that he had been exposed to such tempting views on a regular basis. She looked at him, alarmed, and asked again what he was talking about. Then, trying to defuse the moment, she told him to just go home and take care of whatever personal issues he had. She reminded him that he still had tasks to finish and should complete his work. He brushed off her suggestion, saying that it was okay. But then he asked what she meant by go home. He was thinking to himself that, at this point, he had done it. He had succeeded in trapping her in this awkward and charged moment. He changed the subject and asked her why she was staring so intently at the protein bar on the desk. He reminded her that she had previously said she didn't want it. She challenged his assumption, asking who had told him she was doing that. Without waiting for a clear answer, he grabbed her hand and told her there was no need to act that way. It was okay to touch him if she wanted to. As all of this played out, he was silently reflecting that the revenge he had been planning was beginning to consume him. It felt like it was going to burn him alive. Then, breaking the silence, he addressed her as team leader. When she asked what he meant by that, he reassured her again, telling her that everything was okay. But in his thoughts, he was justifying it all, saying to himself that since she was his colleague, and they were supposed to train together, the workout session was something he needed to go through with at least once. She responded by clarifying that they would only do the cardio session one time, and then they would both go home. He agreed, saying, of course. Though in his mind he had already decided that there was no going back. He didn't care anymore. He had always wanted to go through this workout session with her, and now it was finally happening, calling her team leader again. He wanted to know whether she was enjoying herself. When she responded that she wasn't sure, he told her that he could make her feel even better. With that, he began teaching her more techniques, guiding her movements with increasing confidence. She protested, asking what he was doing and pointing out how embarrassing it was to be doing something like this in an office setting. But he continued calmly, still teaching her the exercises, and at one point asked why she was so cute. Meanwhile, his thoughts drifted to Hansomi, and he concluded to himself that everything had started because of her. He promised himself that his revenge wasn't over. Not yet. The moment would come. He would wait. He began to recall a particular day when the team leader had been praising all the colleagues in the office. She had been smiling warmly and expressing her appreciation, saying that everyone had done a great job that quarter. She noted that the planning team had once again been the best performer and thanked everyone sincerely for their continued hard work. 2 team members were standing in front of her at the time. One of them had told manager Lee So-hee that she was always right and that they were all indebted to her. The other added that their achievements wouldn't have been possible without her leadership. Meanwhile, another girl who had been standing beside Dahoon at the time had been quietly observing. She had thought to herself that So-hee, who smiled more than anyone and was loved by everyone, was truly an ideal boss. She admired how So-hee managed her work so efficiently, all while being graceful and beautiful. She wasn't someone anyone could dismiss or take lightly. Later, So-hee had walked over to Dahoon and addressed him directly. She had reminded him that it would soon be a full year since he had joined the company, encouraging him to continue working hard in the future. She thanked him in advance for his dedication, then gently pointed out that his necktie had come a bit loose. In that moment, Dahoon had been filled with admiration, thinking to himself that manager Lee So-hee was the most respected person in the entire company. He had also started imagining himself doing a cardio session with her. He had expected it to be good, but the experience was proving to be even more incredible than he had imagined. As the session continued, he had been fully focused on guiding her, giving instructions as he went. At one point, he had told her to lift her head up and keep her posture straight, calling her manager with a teasing tone. In his mind, he couldn't help but feel that the situation was more interesting than he had anticipated. Perhaps she might even be enjoying it. He kept complimenting her, almost excessively. He asked if it was really possible that she was a married woman with a child, remarking that she looked far too beautiful for that to be true. He added that her husband must be incredibly lucky, but she quickly cut him off, telling him not to bring up her husband or her child during the session. He responded casually, saying it was fine, but she interrupted him again, insisting they take a break. He agreed, telling her that she would get used to it soon enough. He also noted that she seemed to have become more sensitive to the workout than she had been before. Then, without warning, he gently kissed her. He looked at her and asked why she was so cute, still caught in his own thoughts. Internally, he was already planning that he would be the one to train her personally during their workout sessions from now on. In his mind, he was thinking that this was a huge success for him, that he had accomplished something he had never expected. He was basking in the moment, convinced that no one else could replace what he had just experienced. But suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. He noticed someone entering the office unexpectedly. It was the night security guard holding a flashlight in his hand. The guard's voice echoed in the dark, asking what kind of sound had been coming from that area. He mentioned that the lights were off and called out to see if anyone was still inside the office. The night shift was taking its toll on the guard, who moved through the dimly lit office, exhausted and muttering to himself that working part-time as a guard was more difficult than he had imagined. He wondered if this was the last room he needed to check. Just as he was about to leave, he suddenly noticed a faint noise coming from the far corner of the office. He froze, startled, and questioned inwardly what that sound could have been. Hesitant but alert, he moved cautiously toward the meeting room. Standing at the entrance, he debated whether he should go inside, asking aloud if anyone was there. As he stood in the silence, unsure of his next move, his phone began to ring, snapping him out of his thoughts. He murmured that a call was coming in and quickly answered. Meanwhile, inside the office, hidden in the shadows, Dahoon and Lee So-hee remained crouched in silence. So-hee whispered, asking if he still wasn't done yet, her voice tight with anxiety. Her instincts told her someone was still nearby. She quietly stated that someone was definitely outside and that if they came in, they'd be caught for sure. Outside, the guard, still distracted by the call, responded to the voice on the other end. They had asked how things were going, and he replied by asking if there was any issue on their side. Then, he added that he was just checking the building and suspected someone might still be inside. Unsure, he asked what he should do next. As the guard's flashlight passed through the hallway, its beam triggered a chain of memories in Dahoon's mind. His thoughts drifted involuntarily to his painful school days haunted by the bullying he endured from Lee So-hee. One vivid memory surfaced. He had been sitting quietly in his classroom when Hansomi had suddenly approached him. Back then, he had gone by the name Lee Sungmin. Han So-mi had leaned toward him and, with a falsely sweet voice, had told him she missed him. Shocked and terrified to see her, he had asked what she was doing there. She had been hiding a piece of paper behind her back and asked playfully if he hadn't received a love letter. Confused, he had questioned what letter she meant. She then claimed that the letter was from him. With a cruel smile, she told him she had been waiting for him ever since she noticed the way he had restlessly stared at her. Without warning, she had grabbed him by the collar and accused him of being a criminal trying to hurt a delicate woman. Then, laughing coldly, she mentioned something about a 10,001 prank. Before he could even respond, she shoved him violently to the floor and broke into loud laughter, calling out to the rest of the class. She had shouted that she had told everyone Lee Sung-min would fall for the trick, mocking him and calling him a loser who had fallen for a fake confession. That moment had stayed with Dahoon like a scar etched into his soul. He had remembered thinking that she was the one who had made him feel so hopeless, the one who had driven him to the edge of suicide. Even now, the pain echoed in his heart. He recalled how she and her group had locked him inside a classroom, laughing as they did it. They had joked about leaving him there until he starved. At the time, he had convinced himself that the nightmare was finally over, that the trauma had faded, but clearly, it hadn't. Snapping back to the present, the voice on the other end of the phone instructed the guard to return quickly after his rotation, as someone else would be covering the night shift. The guard assured them he'd be back soon, then exited the office with a grumble, muttering that he truly hated this job. Once the coast was clear, Dahoon and So-hee emerged from hiding, gasping quietly as they caught their breath. So-hee, still tense, remarked that they had survived the scare. But Dahoon wasn't fully present. His thoughts lingered on his earlier flashback. He questioned whether he had just seriously considered giving up. So-hee, still shaken, confessed that she no longer wanted to continue playing this twisted game. Dahoon admitted he had also thought about quitting just moments ago. But now, something had changed inside him. So he looked at him, confused and unsure. Meanwhile, Dahoon silently resolved that no matter what happened, he would have his revenge. He reminded himself that she, Lee So-hee, was Han So-mi's mother. The same So-mi who had made his life a living hell. There was no way he was letting it go now. Both of them agreed to move forward with the next session of the game. However, the requirements would be a little different this time. Dahoon held up a mirror and instructed her on how to look into it. So he gasped when she saw her reflection, exclaiming that her face was completely flushed and looked terribly red. Embarrassed, she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Dahoon commented that it felt strangely nice. As the intensity of the moment grew, So-hee's mind began to feel numb. Dahoon, however, was still deep in thought, struggling with his emotions. He knew that if things continued in this direction, he might become someone unrecognizable, even to himself. She had been pleading with him continuously to end the exercise, her voice filled with confusion and frustration as she kept asking what exactly he was trying to accomplish. Yet, he replied nonchalantly, almost teasingly, saying that it looked like she enjoyed doing workout sessions in silent, secluded places. He added that he was simply trying to finish it quickly, just as she had asked him to speed things up earlier. Despite her clear attempts to stop him, he went on with the session without hesitation, fully focused and undeterred. Inwardly, he was reeling. The situation felt surreal to him, almost too strange to be real. He kept thinking that the manager who was admired, even idolized, by all the employees was now doing an intense cardio session alone with him in a private, quiet space. The realization was making him feel dizzy. His thoughts raced as he struggled to contain his excitement. Things were progressing faster than he had ever planned, and his strategy was working out better than he could have imagined. On the other side of the city, Han So-mi had been trying again and again to call her mother, her fingers moving restlessly across her phone screen. Anxiety slowly crept in as her calls went unanswered. She couldn't help but wonder what was happening. Was her mother working late again? She had sent several messages too, asking if her mom had finished work, questioning what was taking so long. But there had been no response. The silence made her increasingly uneasy, a quiet tension settling in her chest. As her own shift neared its end, she came to a decision. It seemed she would have to go pick her mother up herself so they could return home together. Before she could leave, however, one of her co-workers approached her with a casual smile and asked if she had a moment to help clean up the store. The colleague even suggested they grab a late-night snack while cleaning. But So-mi politely declined without hesitation, explaining that she had something she needed to take care of after her shift. With that, she left the cafe without looking back. While walking through the quiet streets, her mind drifted again. A part of her couldn't help but feel irritated with herself. She was constantly worrying over the smallest, most meaningless things. Everything seemed so insignificant in hindsight. She had once imagined that growing up would bring clarity and excitement, that adulthood would be different, better. But the truth had turned out to be far from her expectations. Life as a grown woman now felt far more monotonous and emotionally dull than her carefree days as a student. As she stood waiting at a streetlight, she pulled out her phone and stared at a photo of herself and her mother. One of their happier moments. The image stirred something soft inside her. She sighed and thought that her life was supposed to be peaceful by now. Wasn't it? Quietly, she dialed her mother's number again. Her voice was gentle this time as she left a message, asking if her mother was still working and telling her how much she missed her. Her thoughts grew reflective. Everyone, she mused, had their own unique definition of happiness. Some chased wealth, others success. But for her, happiness was something much simpler. Living a quiet, ordinary life with her mother. That was her version of happiness. That was all she had ever wanted. She reached the building and entered the elevator, pressing the button for the 16th floor. As she ascended, her mind whispered a quiet wish, to leave peacefully, without any more complications, without getting caught in messes that didn't concern her. Let's just live a calm life, she told herself silently, without being pulled into unnecessary chaos. The elevator dinged, signaling its arrival. The doors slid open slowly, and there, standing directly in front of her, was her mother, So-hee. Her breath caught for a moment. Her eyes flickered toward her mother's hand. It looked odd, perhaps tense, and then shifted to the man standing beside her. It was Dahun. So-mi looked at her mother with a questioning expression and immediately asked whether she was finished with work. Then, more sharply, she asked what had happened to her hand, and who the man beside her was. Dahun turned toward So-hee and, with slight surprise, asked if this girl was her daughter. Then he turned to So-mi directly. His tone was calm and polite as he told her that he had heard quite a bit about her and had been looking forward to meeting her someday. As he looked into her eyes, something inside him stirred. It had been so long since they had seen each other face to face like this. He hadn't expected this meeting, hadn't even thought it possible anymore. But now, as fate would have it, here they were. He stared at her quietly for a moment, then thought to himself that, despite everything that had happened, it was truly a strange pleasure to meet Han So-mi once again. So he had glanced at her mother with a skeptical expression, her voice laced with disbelief as she asked whether the tall young man in front of them was the same loser her mother had mentioned in the past. The one who, according to her, had done nothing but grow taller. In response, Han So-mi had studied the young man carefully before nodding. She had affirmed with certainty that he was indeed from their class, though she appeared slightly taken aback herself. She questioned aloud what was going on with him and then repeated, almost as if to convince herself, that there was no mistaking it. He had to be Lee Sung-min from those earlier days. So he, unable to suppress her curiosity, had asked her mother what he was doing here. But Han So-mi had appeared hesitant, caught in a brief moment of uncertainty. She muttered that it had to be him. There was no way she was wrong, but still questioned whether she could trust her own recognition. Determined to resolve her doubts, she moved forward slightly and called out to him, asking if he was really Lee Sung-min. But the young man didn't stop. Without making eye contact, he simply passed by the two women and said, "Excuse me, I'll be heading in first," before walking toward the exit. As he reached the door, he paused for a moment and spoke over his shoulder, correcting them with composure. He told them his name was Suk Dahun, not Lee Sung-min, and asked that they please remember that for the next time. Although he didn't turn to look at them directly, his eyes briefly flicked in Han So-mi's direction, and a quiet fire seemed to flicker behind them. In his thoughts, a firm promise formed. He would come after her soon. There was a resolve in him that refused to be ignored. The following day, So-hee sat alone in her office, her thoughts tangled in a mix of embarrassment, confusion, and regret. Her fingers nervously tapped against her desk, and her gaze remained fixed on the empty space in front of her. The memory of what had happened still clung to her like a shadow. She kept replaying the events in her mind, convinced that she must have gone mad. Regardless of how good the atmosphere had initially been, it had all been swept away by one reckless moment. While she continued to overanalyze everything, the door opened without warning, and Dahun stepped inside, his tone bright and casual as he greeted her with a polite, "Good morning, madam." She glanced up, managing to respond with a quiet, "Good morning, Dahun." Though her voice lacked warmth, he observed her pale complexion for a moment before stepping closer. Internally, he admitted to himself that his visit wasn't just for official matters. He had come to see how she was holding up after what had happened. When she asked what he needed this time, he replied that he had come to deliver a report. But inwardly, his mind was drawn to the strange thrill he felt just being near her. It was unfamiliar, yet oddly exciting. After a beat, he leaned forward slightly and remarked that she didn't look well, teasing that a grown woman like her should know better than to neglect her own health. Without waiting for her response, he stepped behind her and gently began massaging her shoulders. Startled, so he stiffened under his touch. She looked uneasy, her body betraying her hesitation. Still, she didn't stop him right away. He commented on how tense her muscles were, claiming she needed to relax. She quickly responded that it wasn't necessary and tried to wave him off. Yet despite her protests, a quiet storm was stirring inside her. She couldn't understand it. Every time he touched her, something strange spread through her body. It wasn't exactly fear, but it wasn't comfort either. It made her skin feel too warm, her thoughts too scattered. Dahoon, picking up on her shallow breathing, asked again if she was okay. He reminded her that she had reacted the same way previously and, with a teasing grin, suggested they do another gaming session like before. Her eyes widened, and she quickly told him to stop. But he continued pushing playfully, commenting that it seemed like her body was already responding. She shook her head, flustered, and insisted that it wasn't like that. Just then, the door opened again, and another employee entered the room. She stopped mid-sentence as she took in the scene, her manager seated, visibly tense, with Dahoon standing far too close behind her. She asked awkwardly if Sohee was busy with Mr. Dahoon. Snapping back into her professional demeanor, Sohee addressed the employee swiftly, asking if she had come for certain documents. When the employee nodded, Sohee assured her she would handle them and politely asked her to leave. The woman nodded again, this time more hesitantly, and exited the room without saying another word. As the door closed, Sohee turned sharply toward Dahoon, whispering with urgency that they had almost been caught. She asked him if he had completely lost his senses and demanded to know what exactly he thought he was doing. She warned that this was dangerous, both professionally and personally. Dahoon, however, only smiled slightly and asked if she had any plans after work. He proposed that they go out for drinks. Beneath his casual tone was a more calculated intention. He thought to himself that he couldn't afford to let her distance herself from him. That was why he had made the suggestion. He needed her to stay close to keep her within reach. That evening, the marketing team gathered at a lively bar, laughter and chatter echoing through the room. Sohee raised her glass in a toast and cheered with a smile. To Marketing Team 1, everyone clinked their glasses together, enjoying the moment. Dahoon sat a short distance away, quietly watching her. He couldn't help but feel annoyed. This wasn't what he had envisioned for the evening. His mind drifted back to earlier when Sohee had announced to the entire team that it had been a while since their last team dinner and suggested they all go out together. He had never imagined she would turn their private invitation into a group event. Leaning closer, he reminded her that he hadn't meant it to be a team dinner. She asked him what was wrong with that, feigning innocence. He realized then that perhaps he had underestimated her cautious nature. When he confessed that he had wanted the evening to be just for the two of them, she had chuckled and replied that drinking together alone would only get her into trouble. He glanced around the bar, realizing that she had made a calculated move. She had purposely brought others along to avoid being alone with him. It was smart, clever, even. He thought to himself that anything beyond friendly conversation in public would be risky now. It was clear she had become more alert to his intentions. Seated beside her, he accidentally brushed against her hand. He quickly apologized, saying he hadn't meant to do that. She looked at him and said it was fine. It wasn't like he had grabbed her or done anything inappropriate. It was just a touch. She asked if it hadn't been on purpose. Her calm, collected reaction left him confused. Something about the way she handled it made him feel like he had lost the upper hand. Then, in an effort to break the tension, he suggested they step outside for some fresh air. She agreed, and the two of them quietly slipped out of the crowded bar. As they stood in the night air, surrounded by quiet streets and flickering neon signs, Dahoon felt a surge of relief. Finally, they were alone. He turned to her and asked how she was feeling, subtly hinting at the idea that this moment, just the two of them, might have been what she truly wanted. But Sohee didn't smile. She looked hesitant, conflicted, and then told him in a firm but quiet voice that they shouldn't be involved in this way. She explained that things could become far too complicated if they crossed that line. Dahoon listened but refused to back away. In his mind, things were already complicated, and he believed she wouldn't be able to escape that reality. Her resistance only fueled his determination. Smirking slightly, he leaned in just enough and suggested a wager. If she won, he promised to never touch her again, never bring up workouts or games, and to keep his distance. But the glint in his eyes told another story, one that hinted he had no intention of losing. So he had asked him in disbelief if he was truly telling the truth. In response, he had assured her sincerely, addressing her as Madam, and had promised that if she managed to keep her composure, no matter what he did from that point onward, he would give up on pursuing her. He had emphasized that he never wished to force her into anything she found uncomfortable or disliked. However, so he had looked at him with a puzzled expression and questioned what exactly he was trying to imply. She wanted confirmation of his promise. He had leaned toward her slightly and reaffirmed, with certainty, that he was indeed serious. In her mind, though, so he was beginning to panic. She realized she was in trouble. He seemed about to touch her chest, which she referred to internally as the headlights. Meanwhile, he had teasingly remarked that it looked like she was preparing herself for a wrestling match. Flustered, so he had immediately denied it and told him to wait, firmly stating that he could not touch her chest. She reminded him that earlier she had drunk quite a bit and wasn't in a proper state for this kind of situation. He had responded with curiosity, asking if that was really the case and wondering aloud why he shouldn't be allowed to touch her. She grew more frustrated and asked why he couldn't just understand her boundaries. Then, as her thoughts spiraled, she feared that if things continued in this direction, she might end up going through that intense cardio session once again. She quietly murmured an apology to Mr. Dahoon before she began stepping away. Confused, he had asked her where she was going, calling her Madam, and then caught hold of her arm. With a playful tone, he reminded her that the bet between them was still on. She turned around and asked what he was doing, clearly unsettled. He reiterated firmly that a bet was a bet and admitted that he wanted to see it one more time, adding that he might have drunk too much as well. His head was spinning. Suddenly, a voice was heard coming from the area behind the building. Some people were asking for cigarettes. It turned out they were employees from the same company. Hearing them, so he had whispered nervously that there were people nearby. Meanwhile, the employees had begun chatting among themselves. One of them, in a hushed voice, remarked that the manager and Dahoon had been acting quite strangely lately. Another agreed, saying it was suspicious how they were always seen together, though someone else chimed in and suggested that perhaps it was because of the ongoing project. Still, the first one insisted that Ms. Dason was probably right in her assumptions. Yet another employee pointed out that the two had even left earlier together, while they themselves were still with their own colleagues. That employee mentioned they might leave soon or maybe not. Someone else shrugged and admitted that they weren't sure what was really going on. So he had overheard the entire conversation and was alarmed. She recognized the voices. They belonged to her own team members. Dahoon, trying to keep things calm, had whispered to her that she should ignore them. But she had grown more anxious and said that they would surely get caught. Dahoon, however, had dismissed her worries, saying that even if they were seen, it wouldn't be a big deal. So he, clearly agitated, shouted at him and accused him of being a liar. He had laughed and told her to stop worrying so much. Meanwhile, one of the employees, Ms. Dason, had begun walking toward the side of the building, saying that she thought she had heard some voices coming from that area. She walked around and called out to see if anyone was there. As she reached the corner, she saw Dahoon standing there. He quickly tried to play it off by saying that he was just planning to head back inside and chuckled lightly. Suspicious, Dason asked him directly if it had been him making the noise, and then inquired about the whereabouts of the manager. Dahoon replied smoothly, saying that the manager had suddenly felt unwell, so she had called a taxi and gone inside to cool off. But in truth, so he hadn't gone anywhere. She was hiding behind a large dustbin drum, crouching down and trying to stay completely still. Back near the doorway, Dason commented aloud that since the manager's belongings were still inside, she would go back in to fetch them. Dahoon had stopped the taxi for Sohee and pointed out that her ride had arrived. She turned to him and asked what he meant by that. Without hesitation, he had informed her that he intended to accompany her, and without waiting for a response, he got into the taxi with her. He smiled and reminded her that he was simply a caring subordinate, just doing his duty. Trying to lighten the mood, he even offered to put on the yoga session and suggested they play a game during the ride. So he, baffled, had looked at him and asked what exactly he thought he was doing. Dahoon assured her not to worry and said he had merely been thinking of helping her enjoy the game, even inside the taxi. Inwardly, so he felt a tug of discomfort. She thought to herself that perhaps she shouldn't always stay so close to him like this. Just then, Dahun turned to her with a more serious tone and said that she should stop what she had been doing earlier. Even if she had been drunk, it didn't justify touching him repeatedly like she had, especially what had happened in the alley. He firmly added that she needed to stop such behavior. Noticing the tension, the taxi driver glanced back and asked Sohee if everything was all right. She quickly reassured him that she was fine. Meanwhile, Dahun began to reflect, wondering if perhaps he had gotten a little too carried away. Eventually, they reached their destination. As the taxi stopped outside Sohee's house, her daughter Han-somi was already standing near the entrance. She immediately noticed her mother's arrival and asked why she had returned so late when she had mentioned having a team dinner. Dahun followed Sohee to the doorstep and saw Somi standing there. The moment he recognized her, a thought crossed his mind. She's here right now. Trying to stay composed, he greeted her politely, saying, "Hello, Miss Manager's daughter," and added with a light laugh that her mother was quite drunk. Internally, he was already planning to make his exit before the situation got too complicated. He told them that he'd be taking his leave now. However, Somi called out to him, asking him to wait. Since it was his first time visiting, she invited him inside for a while. Dahun accepted the invitation and entered the apartment, taking a seat on the sofa. While he settled in, Somi quietly observed him. She couldn't shake the feeling that he looked familiar. She wondered to herself, isn't he Lee Sung-min from high school? Curiosity got the better of her, and she asked about his age and whether he had ever lived in the area. Dahun responded with a casual laugh. Sohee, overhearing the conversation, interrupted and told Somi to stop. She reminded her daughter that they didn't have anything at home to serve their guest, and that even Ah-hyung wasn't around. She asked Somi if she could quickly go to the nearby mart and buy something. Somi looked surprised and asked if she had to go right then. She also questioned why Ah-hyung wasn't home yet. But eventually, she agreed, though she couldn't help but point out that she was the one who had invited Dahun in the first place. So he nodded and told her she'd go wash up while Somi was out, urging her to return quickly. Somi protested, saying it was strange to leave a guest alone like that. But Sohee simply explained that she was feeling grimy from all the alcohol and her body felt sticky and smelly. She said she had to clean herself up. Dahun, smiling warmly, told her not to worry and reassured her that he would be fine. He also told Somi to take her time and not to rush. Somi then left for the mart. On her way, she was deep in thought. Something about Dahun seemed too familiar. She couldn't help but wonder, was he really someone else? In her distraction, she lightly kicked an empty soda can lying on the sidewalk. Back at the apartment, Sohee was finally enjoying a hot shower. She thought to herself how grateful she was for the opportunity to wash up in peace. Still, her mind wandered to Somi and the strange ideas she might be entertaining after seeing her and Dahun together. The thought embarrassed her. She couldn't believe such misunderstanding might arise, and all because of a subordinate like Dahun. Unexpectedly, Dahun had also entered the bathroom, joining her there. He was thinking to himself that he had almost given up on trying anything today. But with nobody else at home, it seemed the perfect chance to carry on their yoga session. Ironically, thanks to Han-somi's well-meaning actions. So he, alarmed by his presence, quickly told him that they should avoid engaging in any cardio session here, especially because Somi would be back soon. But Dahun seemed unbothered. He casually remarked that it wasn't a big deal, even if they were caught, he didn't mind showing everything. Yet, despite his relaxed attitude, he admitted that he would still take the risk, clearly unable to resist the temptation. Han-somi had gone to the mart to pick up something for the guest. As she stood in the middle of the store, she began to wonder why she had rushed there in the first place. If the mart was open 24/7, then there was no reason for her to panic about its closing time. She stood there, pausing in the aisle, and mused silently to herself that perhaps fruits would be a good choice. Maybe something like a melon. Her thoughts slowly drifted to the past, to a memory that still lingered in her mind. There was a particular day when she had bullied Dahun by forcing him to eat a melon. She clearly remembered instructing him to open his mouth properly so he could eat it. That image came flashing back to her as she looked at the fruits. Shaking off the memory and returning to the present, she made up her mind and decided that she would buy the melon after all. It looked fresh and appetizing. Meanwhile, on the other side, Sohee had turned to Dahun and told him that Somi would be arriving soon. Dahun had responded casually, mentioning that if they got caught, they could simply show everything to Somi and explain. Sohee, however, began to panic slightly and asked what he meant by that. In his mind, Dahun was thinking that Han-somi still seemed uncertain about the situation, and he'd better hurry before things got out of hand. So he repeatedly expressed her concern, saying she believed they should stop whatever they were doing. Dahoon acknowledged that he had considered following her advice, but then questioned whether there was really any reason for him to listen to her after getting off work. She reacted to his words by accusing him of being unkind, insisting that his behavior made no sense. When he asked her if she wasn't feeling well, so he replied that she was trying to resist, but her body was not listening to her, likely because of the alcohol. She continued, confessing that even though she was being forced into the situation, she had reached her limit. She needed to stop the yoga session immediately because her head was starting to feel blank and disoriented. At the same time, a troubling thought crossed her mind. She worried that inviting a subordinate to her house and engaging in such a yoga session would seem absurd if her daughter were to witness any of it. Just then, in her imagination, Somi suddenly returned home and called out to her mother, asking if she was still in the shower. She approached the bathroom and caught sight of both of them engaged in the yoga session. So he, in a moment of panic, shouted at Somi, telling her she shouldn't be watching such a scene. Somi stood frozen in shock and exclaimed that there was no way this could be happening. Dahoon, in that imagined moment, was also filled with regret, thinking to himself that if Somi saw him like this, there would be no way to undo the damage. But all of that was merely playing out in Sohi's head. In reality, Somi hadn't returned home yet. So he, still in a state of inner turmoil, continued to plead with him to stop the yoga session. Dahoon, however, told her that he would finish before her daughter returned and hoped that she would cooperate. She assured him that she would cooperate as long as he completed it quickly, before Somi arrived. He acknowledged her willingness but then added that her cooperation alone might not be enough. He urged that they needed to hurry and wrap everything up before his daughter came back. He had looked at her with an amused expression, remarking that she seemed far more excited than he had anticipated. His words caught her slightly off guard, and she turned to him with a puzzled expression, asking him what exactly he meant by that. Rather than giving a direct answer, he instead began pressuring her in a teasing yet commanding tone, telling her to beg him properly for the exercise training. There was a flicker of hesitation in her eyes as she replied that it would be too embarrassing to say something like that while looking him straight in the face. Seeing her reluctance, he decided to push her further. He told her that if she couldn't say it out loud, he wouldn't hold back, even if her daughter were to walk in on them. Faced with no other option, she finally agreed and said the words, surrendering to the moment. He smirked in satisfaction, praised her with a casual good work, and with that, both of them resumed their workout and cardio session without the slightest trace of guilt. The room was silent except for the sound of their movements, as they pretended not to notice the tension hanging thick in the air. Sometime later, Somi returned from the mart. She entered the house carrying a shopping bag in one hand. As she stepped through the doorway, Sohi, who had been waiting by the front door, remarked that she had taken a rather long time. Somi, brushing some loose strands of hair from her face, replied that the mart had taken a bit of time to reach, and then asked her mother if she had already finished taking her shower. Still catching her breath, Somi asked casually about Dahoon's whereabouts. So he, maintaining a neutral tone, told her that it had gotten late, so he had already left. Somi paused for a moment, visibly disappointed by the news. With a faint sigh, she muttered that it was unfortunate, as she had hoped to talk to him a little longer. Deep in her thoughts, she felt a quiet ache rising within her. Though she didn't say it aloud, her mind echoed with his name, Sungmin. The realization began to settle in her chest. She truly missed him. The next day, inside the office during the lunch break, the employees had gathered in the break room, enjoying their midday meal. There was a relaxed atmosphere as laughter and conversation filled the room. On the table was a beautifully arranged plate of sliced melon. Dahoon, noticing the fruit, looked mildly surprised and asked why they had brought melon that day. One of the female employees responded with a smile, saying she had brought it especially for the manager, but added that he should have some too, then politely offered him a slice. She further explained that she had cut it so everyone could share and insisted that he come over and have a piece. Dahoon hesitated and quietly declined. She gently urged him again, telling him not to be so reserved and just try it. Still resisting, he made an excuse, saying that he had an allergy and couldn't eat melon. As he uttered those words, his mind involuntarily drifted back to a memory that still lingered in the back of his thoughts. The time when he had been bullied by Somi, who had forced him to eat melon despite his reluctance. That day had left a lasting impression on him, one that he hadn't quite shaken off. Returning to the present, he couldn't help but wonder whether she had truly changed. As much as he tried to convince himself otherwise, something inside him whispered that she hadn't. Despite the passing time and new surroundings, she still seemed like the same person he had known before. Just then, Manager So-hee entered the break room, briefly interrupting his thoughts. She glanced at Dahoon and told him she was heading out for a moment. Miss Daesum stood quietly, watching both of them walk away, before turning to her friend and murmuring with a suspicious tone that she had always found something odd between those two. She wondered aloud if they were actually dating. Her friend immediately dismissed the thought, saying there was no way since the manager was a married woman. It simply didn't make sense. Still, she added, who really knew what was going on. Even Mr. Dahoon didn't seem like the type of guy who would get involved in such things. Meanwhile, Dahoon was teasing So-hee, asking her if meeting alone meant she had finally become proactive. So-hee, startled by the insinuation, quickly denied it and clarified that it wasn't like that at all. She began explaining herself, saying that the project from the other day was actually the reason she brought him out. She needed to inform him that she would be leaving on a business trip in 2 days. Dahoon seemed unimpressed and asked if she really brought him all the way out just to say that. So he quickly responded that there was more to it. She hesitated before adding that it was also about yesterday. He narrowed his eyes and asked her what exactly about yesterday. So he hesitated again, then cautiously asked if, by any chance, something had happened between him and her daughter, Han So-mi. Her mind wandered back to the day before, recalling when Han So-mi had come to her in frustration, venting about how much trouble she had gone through for Mr. Dahoon, only for him to leave so abruptly. So-mi had muttered regretfully that she should have just come back earlier instead. So he had quietly agreed, lost in thought. So-mi had then noticed her mother's distracted state and asked if she was feeling unwell. So he had responded that it wasn't anything serious, only that she had spent too long bathing. As she thought back on that moment, So he realized with a pang of anxiety that she had done the wrestling practice again, but this time with Dahoon. On top of that, she had said some strange things. The more she thought about it, the more she felt overwhelmed by the complexity of the situation. Later, So-mi had asked her if she could call Mr. Dahoon to hang out again sometime, adding that she really wanted to meet him. So he had silently panicked at the suggestion, thinking to herself that there was no way she could let something happen between So-mi and Dahoon as well. Back in the present, So he tried to address the situation tactfully. She told Dahoon that her daughter had seemed eager to grow closer to him, but she hoped he wouldn't get any ideas or misunderstand her intentions. Dahoon, clearly amused, asked what exactly she meant by that, suggesting, half-jokingly, that maybe he should approach her daughter and see where things might lead. So he, surprised and flustered, asked him what on earth he was talking about. He smiled and replied that her daughter was close to his age and quite pretty too, but added that he currently had her, so he, as his partner and manager. Given that, he said, there was absolutely no chance he could even think about other women. He reminded her that she should know very well what he meant. So he sighed and said that she understood. As Dahoon walked away, his thoughts raced. Things were progressing faster than he had expected. Han So-mi clearly wanted to grow closer to him. He wasn't sure whether So-hee merely suspected something or had already confirmed it in her mind. Either way, he hadn't anticipated her bringing up such a topic. He decided firmly that any unnecessary contact should be avoided from now on. On his way back, he crossed paths with Miss Daesum again. She stopped him, pretending curiosity as she asked where he had been. Dahoon looked at her with a hint of concern, wondering what she was doing there. Daesum quickly assured him that she hadn't been following him, then laughed in a light-hearted way. She commented on how surprising it was to see him coming back from a conversation with the manager. Dahoon stared at her, puzzled, wondering how long she had been standing there. She continued with casual small talk, asking if he had been discussing a project with the manager and remarked that it looked like he was working hard on it. Dahoon grew uneasy. He hadn't heard the door open or any footsteps. It dawned on him that she might have been there from the very beginning. His mind raced. Had she seen anything? A few days later, both Dahoon and So-hee prepared for a business trip. They met at Seoul Station. Upon arriving, So-hee mentioned that she was going to buy some bottled water and asked him to check the train schedule. He agreed and took a seat on a bench, pulling out a cigarette as he began to reflect. He thought to himself that while he was fine with the business trip, he was confused and slightly annoyed that system manager Daesum was also coming along. He had made plans expecting it to be just the two of them. Feeling the weight of disappointment, he walked over to Daesum and pointed out that the trip was originally meant only for him and the manager. Daesum replied with a shrug that she had been added at the last minute, and the manager had asked her to help out as a seminar assistant. Dahoon listened quietly, feeling more and more convinced that So-hee had planned it this way. He wondered if she had orchestrated the whole situation to keep things in check. Daesum, sensing the awkward silence, tried to change the topic by commenting on how bright the sky was. Dahoon internally concluded that things could easily get complicated if they had been alone on the trip. Perhaps, he thought, so he had brought Daesum along intentionally, to serve as a barrier. Trying to keep things casual, he offered to buy Daesum a cigarette and asked if she wanted one. She nodded, and he replied with a nice. Before heading off, instead of going straight to the cigarette stall, he headed to the shop where Sohee had gone for bottled water. Spotting her there, she turned around, surprised to see him, and asked if something was wrong. The shopkeeper interrupted, stating the cost of the water as 1,500 won. Dahoon casually said that he came to buy cigarettes and asked the shopkeeper for 2 boxes of Mobius. As he waited, he thought to himself that this was probably the right time to tell her something. As the shopkeeper handed over his purchase, Dahoon picked up an extra item, walked over to Sohee. Sohee stared at him, visibly confused and shocked. Sohee returned to Miss Daesum with a grateful smile and thanked her sincerely, expressing that she must have been caught off guard by the sudden call. She appreciated her making the effort to come despite the short notice. Daesum responded warmly, assuring her that it was no problem at all. Sohee then requested her assistance for the seminar preparation, saying it would be a big help just for today. Daesum agreed, although she admitted with a light chuckle that she wasn't sure how much assistance she could actually provide, especially since Mr. Dahoon was also present. Dahoon chimed in with a friendly tone, remarking that it was his first time attending a seminar like this, so he expected to learn a lot from both of them. As the 3 of them settled into their seats on the train, Miss Daesum casually handed a packet of biscuits to Dahoon, telling him that she had picked them up earlier on her way to the station. Dahoon thanked her politely, but inwardly, he was reflecting on how the situation was growing more complicated. He hadn't anticipated that Sohee would bring along the assistant manager, and it was beginning to feel as if the dynamic between them was being subtly monitored. As he ate the biscuits, a few crumbs stuck near the corner of his mouth. Sohee noticed this and, without hesitation, reached out gently to wipe it off. She lightly scolded him for eating so carelessly, teasing that he was letting the crumbs fall all over his face. Dahoon grew visibly shy at the unexpected gesture, but didn't say anything in response. So he quickly pulled back and apologized, realizing she might have invaded his personal space. She asked if she had come too close. Dahoon, trying not to reveal his flustered state, assured her it was perfectly fine, even though he was thinking to himself that he had no plans of backing off so easily, no matter how awkward things became. So he murmured that of course it was awkward, acknowledging the strangeness of the moment. Miss Daesum, who sat beside them, quietly observed the interaction. Her thoughts drifted as she wondered why everyone seemed so fixated on each other. The image of the previous day returned to her mind. She remembered seeing Sohee and Dahoon together and overhearing snippets of their conversation. Something about their closeness and the familiarity in their tone made her feel uneasy. From her perspective, it was becoming more and more apparent that the manager and Dahoon were growing too close for comfort. Once they arrived at the destination for the business trip, the welcoming committee greeted them warmly and thanked them for coming. Sohee responded modestly, saying it wasn't a big deal. She then introduced her own team members to the hosts and, turning to Daesum, politely asked her to take the printed seminar materials and get the copies made as discussed. Meanwhile, Dahoon offered to assist Sohee in setting up the seminar room, volunteering without hesitation. She accepted his help with a thankful smile, acknowledging that his support was greatly appreciated. Daesum, standing quietly nearby, observed their exchange and silently noted how comfortable and synchronized they seemed, almost as if they had done this kind of thing many times before. Inwardly, Daesum found it surprising that Sohee, a married woman with a child, would carry such a dynamic with a subordinate from the same team. She reflected on how casually Sohee expressed her gratitude to Dahoon. Those thank yous felt oddly familiar, almost habitual. It left her wondering whether there was more to their relationship than met the eye. At the seminar room hosted by headquarters, Sohee and Dahoon got to work. They began preparing the space efficiently, working side by side. As they arranged the projector and cables, Dahoon leaned in slightly and remarked that it was finally just the 2 of them. Sohee glanced at him with a frown and asked what he meant by that, before quickly telling him to adjust the light well and focus on the task. Dahoon helped her as instructed, but inside, he was kicking himself for speaking without thinking. He wondered if his words had bothered her. Sohee, clearly flustered by the atmosphere, asked him to stop saying such inappropriate things. She reminded him firmly that Miss Daesum was present, and they were working outside in a professional environment. She stressed that they were here for work and that nothing of the sort he was suggesting could or should happen under these circumstances. Eventually, after thorough preparations, the seminar room was ready. So he looked satisfied and commented cheerfully that everything had finally been arranged. She then asked Dahun to check whether the screen looked fine. However, he seemed more interested in making use of the remaining time. He thought to himself that this could be a perfect opportunity to normalize their playful interactions. Slowly, he began moving closer to her again. Sensing his intention, so he immediately questioned him, asking what he thought he was doing. She reminded him sternly that they couldn't engage in their usual gaming session in this setting. Dahun smirked and replied that it was a shame, as he had no intention of holding back his urge to play. He acknowledged that the seminar was starting soon but didn't seem bothered by it. So he, now slightly panicked, pointed out that if someone entered the room at that moment, their chances of getting caught would definitely increase. But Dahun countered confidently, saying they still had an hour left, maybe even more. There was plenty of time to spare. She sighed, resigned, and finally said, "All right." He gave a satisfied nod, telling her it was good that she understood. The two of them began their familiar game, and so he hurriedly told him to move faster, urging him to finish before anyone else walked in and discovered them. Miss Daysum was occupied with taking printouts of some documents while reflecting inwardly, wondering if she was being overly sensitive. Although she acknowledged that she was a woman, she couldn't deny that the manager appeared attractive in her eyes. However, she also found Mr. Dahun's behavior increasingly troubling, and the contrast between what she thought and what she saw left her unsettled. Meanwhile, on the other side, Dahun and Sohee were fully engrossed in their workout. Sohee had exerted herself so intensely that her mind felt like it was going blank. Dahun had been urging her with a teasing tone, asking if the manager was joking around and telling her to play more seriously, assuring her that he wouldn't mind. The atmosphere between them was a strange mix of tension and playful energy. At that moment, Miss Daysum entered the same room and informed them that she had finished with the printouts. She then asked if they had completed the room setup. Dahun, surprised at how quickly she had returned, responded that the preparations had just been completed a moment earlier. Daysum acknowledged the update and remarked that they had done a good job, then inquired whether anything had been particularly difficult. Dahun replied that he had simply followed the instructions and hadn't encountered any issues. Still, in his mind, he was becoming increasingly aware of how close they were getting, and that awareness made him more cautious with every passing minute. Daysum then asked him if he could check the copies for her. At the same time, Sohee was hiding under the podium, trying to avoid being seen by Miss Daysum. Dahun was thinking that they couldn't afford to be caught and that he needed to resolve the situation quickly. He told Daysum that he had taken a quick look at the files and found them to be well organized, which came as a relief to both of them. Sohee, observing the situation from her hiding spot, wondered if he truly intended to continue playing their game, even under such circumstances. It baffled her that he remained composed, almost enjoying the risk. Dahun then turned to Daysum and expressed his gratitude for her consistent support, referring to her affectionately as his sister manager. Daysum reminded him that she was the one who had entrusted him with this project in the first place. Dahun agreed, stating that the opportunity had allowed him to become closer to the manager. Then, shifting the conversation, Daysum hesitated slightly before saying she might be going off topic. When Dahun asked what she meant, she hesitantly inquired if something was going on between him and the manager. Caught off guard, Dahun appeared surprised and asked her to repeat the question. Daysum clarified that she wasn't sure how to phrase it, but it seemed to her as if the two of them were getting along unusually well, perhaps too well for a professional setting. Dahun suspected that she might have seen them on the staircase the other day, but instead of addressing it directly, he diverted the conversation. Laughing awkwardly, he denied any such possibility and explained that no matter how beautiful or attractive the manager might be, she was still his superior, and he couldn't possibly view her that way. He added that he had merely seen her daughter once by coincidence and found her very pretty, which had piqued his interest in meeting her. From her hiding place, so he thought to herself that this couldn't be happening. Meanwhile, Daysum, noticing Dahun's tense expression and his downward gaze, asked if something was wrong and why he kept looking underneath. Dahun brushed off the concern, claiming that his legs had gone slightly numb and that it was nothing serious. So he, still hiding and thinking quickly, resolved that she couldn't allow him to get any closer to her, or to her precious daughter, Somi. She made up her mind to satisfy him quickly and bring everything to a conclusion once the game was over, no matter how uncomfortable the situation had become. Dahun, on the other hand, was determined not to let Sohee go without fully engaging in the game. Daesum looked around and asked where the manager had gone. As she glanced toward the podium, something caught her attention. She narrowed her eyes and asked aloud what the faint vibrating sound was, wondering aloud if it was coming from underneath the podium. Her curiosity was growing, and so was the silence in the room. Dahoon stood frozen for a moment, completely taken aback, as it suddenly struck him that they had completely forgotten about their phone. The realization sent a jolt through him. It could have exposed them entirely. At that exact moment, Miss Daesum approached, her expression curious yet cautious, as she asked if, by any chance, there was a manager present somewhere down there. Her voice held a trace of suspicion that didn't go unnoticed. She walked toward the podium slowly, her eyes scanning the space until she caught sight of manager Sohee crouching awkwardly behind it.